This episode of On Point features West Point graduate and technology entrepreneur Ben Faw. As co-founder of AdVon Commerce, Ben helps the company to harness proprietary software to create value in e-commerce. He has expertise in consumer internet with a focus on tech, e-commerce, and media. The former platoon leader and executive officer in the 25th Infantry talks about his journey to West Point, experiences in his military career, and following his interest in the business world, provides some blunt advice on what it's like being an entrepreneur.
Welcome to On Point. I'm Tim Shaw, class of 2004.
And I'm Lance Dietz, class of 2008.
And today we are joined by a very special guest, Ben Faw, class of 2007. Ben, how are you?
Great. Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Lance. Excited to be here.
So we're going to go through a bunch of different topics, but first I want to get to how you first became interested in the military and then business.
Yeah, so I think for me, Tim, the interest in the military, I'll blame on reading too many books as a young person, particularly probably age like 4 to 10, when there's still the ability to build impressions. And then the interest in business, similarly, I was actually selling some bottle caps when I was about 4 or 5, just the idea of creating value, engaging with people, commerce, those things were intriguing to me. And I got that taste and found it enjoyable.
And what led you to West Point?
Yeah, so I think for that one, it was really a combination of things. At the time, clearly a lot of the books I read were about military history. For whatever reason, those were books I got into. And a lot of those people, whether it be Eisenhower or MacArthur or Patton, had gone to West Point. So that was one, I think, thread that kind of planted those seeds. Another thread was, coming from a place where there was a lot of scarcity, the idea of free college and not understanding anything about financial aid, knowing you actually got paid to go there was certainly a factor. And then the idea of service, being a part of something bigger than myself, the idea of learning something about leadership. I think each of those threads was interwoven in the final decision for me to kind of make that not only a place that I applied to, but it was my first choice as I was kind of going through those processes.
And at West Point, you studied econ. What made you decide to focus on econ?
Closest thing to business. I mean, at the time, I think it was about the closest, Tim, but that's a really good question. I did look at a couple of other things. For me, I think it was the thread, the being close to business. I liked the kind of track of that particular program. The whole social sciences program had just a good track of putting people into good both military careers as well as kind of private sector careers from what I could tell. And I kind of had this view that I would either, I know this gets into some other things we may cover later, but I kind of had this view of either going into like a longer term military career, or I'm probably getting out at the 5-year mark. And it felt like econ would be good positioning for either pathway. That was kind of the big decision. And I actually enjoyed particularly the courses around finance and economic growth. I thought that stuff was frankly very interesting and still find it interesting.
During your time at West Point, was there a particular professor or instructor, either in econ or I guess otherwise, that you got to know well, became a mentor, influenced you and kind of what you did after school or even at school as well?
I had a few professors that I certainly respected and learned a lot from. I wouldn't say that anyone in particular had this hugely outlandish impact or influence on decisions I made either there or later in terms of the kind of academic faculty that taught me. I like Damodar Gujarati quite a bit. He was my economic growth professor, civilian. And then I like Spencer Kluwat, who was my advisor for econ. And he was involved with the social department. He's back there now, I think he's an academy professor. And there was a guy named Thaddeus Underwood who taught maybe macro, who was actually very cool as well, who I've kept in some touch with. But not a lot of other professors. On the other hand, Dean Newman, who was a bit of a controversial figure to some while I was there, that you may recall, Lance, was the Special Forces branch representative for my yearling, I think plebe yearling and junior year. He was incredibly influential, an incredible encourager and supporter of kind of all my pursuits. And I still just think the world of him. And who knows if I would have had the successes even remained at West Point without some of the different steps he took to be a real encourager and supporter and advocate for me.
Let's get into our first segment, AAR, or for our non-military listeners, after action review. Ben, where was your head at in regards to post-grad life? Did you know what you wanted to do?
It's a great question, Tim. I knew I was going to do the Army because that was kind of 100% slated. I branched infantry, which made sense and was where I wanted to be. And I was excited about that. I think, if you'd asked me upon graduation, what do you think is going to happen? It would have been, well, I'd done selection for Special Forces as a cadet. My view was go back into that community and likely, at least give it my best shot to make it into that cohort of people in terms of kind of the Special Forces world. And then, at least try to get a slot for the long walk and pursue that path if it works, from a health, injury, and performance perspective. If that path, wasn't playing out, I think that the default in my mind was always back into something in business, having had done some things in business in high school and through my childhood. So that was kind of the two paths for me. It was always a question of no one serves in the Army, forever, right? Everyone has a retirement date or you pass while in service or whatever it might be. So I think for me, it was always business will be a part of this story at some point. Is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years? Didn't know at the time.
And then walk the listener through your post-grad journey and how did you get to where you are today?
Thanks, Tim. It's been a rather wonky, strange ride that I'm still not sure completely connects on a perfect thread, but maybe in like 50 years, I'll look back and say it does. But the short version is, the infantry schools, Ranger School, Airborne School, did a year in Northern Iraq, was in Hawaii with 25th, went to the Army Corps of Engineers as a general's aide, ended up was going to transition out. I'd saved up a bunch of days of leave, did an internship in investment banking, summer 2011 at UBS in New York. Don't really recommend for everyone to use their leave for a 90-hour work week that Lance is familiar with, but it worked for me. That helped me probably in a big way overcome a well sub 4.0 GPA at West Point to still get into some what I consider to be very fortunate slots at business schools. But I actually worked at Tesla Motors between that final Army tenure after UBS and before going to Harvard Business School for business school. Interned at LinkedIn, went back full-time to LinkedIn. On the side, was working on this project, BestReviews, that we were working on as last semester at business school. Went full-time with that. We then sold that to Tribune Publishing, which was super fortunate because we were bootstrapped and didn't have venture capital dilution. Moved to an advisory role there. That was in 2019, started and have built out this company here at AdVon Commerce. And then we actually sold the remainder in the kind of final transaction for BestReviews, given we had just sold a portion initially. And that all wrapped up late 2020. And so it's been quite an interesting kind of path, but I find founding something and trying to grow it from relatively nothing to something is a very interesting and unique life experience.
I want to drill down or peel the onion on a few of what you said. It seems like you went from big company all the way to starting your own company. Army, UBS, Tesla, BestReviews, AdVon. Did you plan it that way? Or is that just how like you kind of gradually realized that I'm an entrepreneur and this is what I do?
I really did think I was an entrepreneur, but at the same time at business school, I learned a lot of how much I didn't know, which I continue to find, at least I think you and I both, Tim, find every incremental day, month, year, and work in an industry is really just an opportunity to better become acquainted with the fact that you don't know anything about anything. And it's incredibly humbling in general. But what I think I took away from business school is, or one of many hundreds of takeaways was the idea that like thinking that I've got this great idea in my head and I know enough about an industry and all these things to go start something and succeed is incredibly low probability. I don't know anything about anything. So this BestReviews thing, maybe it goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't. The timing was wonky. I'd already signed with LinkedIn by the time we were getting some traction. And look, I probably didn't have the confidence in my own abilities to start something. Maybe that was accurate, or maybe there was a confidence disconnect. I don't know. I would say I would love to have been able to start something out of business school and have gone full time with it. And if I'd done so with BestReviews, probably would have been fortuitous from a a lot of levels, but learned a ton at LinkedIn and actually understood something, some tiny fraction of something about digital marketing, which before I knew effectively nothing about, and a little bit about lead generation, conversion, optimization, these things that I knew nothing about coming into business school. And business school didn't teach me those technical skills, but I think taught me a lot of how to leverage them. And so for me, LinkedIn was actually a great stepping stone to be then comfortable. BestReviews had gotten enough traction. My level on the risk profile factors in here, Tim. And I think you think about this a lot too. Like for those that aren't super familiar, there's this thing called VIX, which is effectively this idea of volatility, and Black-Scholes, which thinks about where an option should price. If an option has no volatility, it has no value. And if it has massive volatility, it has massive value. And I think what I've been trying to do in real simple terms is get as far out on the risk curve into the most volatile place I can possibly go, because your expected return, in theory, over time is highest there. And I think the money thing is what people often think about, and they're missing the big picture, which is learnings, growth, friendships. Just like if you'd wanted to do some, really, really soft undergraduate program and some really, really soft version of RTC, guess what? You're not going to walk away with the same level of friendship and camaraderie because you haven't done anything hard. But if you seek out the absolute hardest possible thing, even if you fail at it, you've tried. And if you can do it with great people, you're probably going to walk away with some amazing friendships along the way.
Looking at your LinkedIn background and through conversations with you over the years, it feels like at LinkedIn, you also picked up not just some knowledge around industry, but potentially sales. I know that a lot of veterans, including myself, when we're in the military or even when we're at West Point, sales is a dirty word. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on just the whole concept of sales and learning about it.
Great point, Tim. I came into LinkedIn, I think, with some possibly God-given natural ability at sales, but no formal training, no formal experience. Yeah, selling a bottle cap as a kid or a gourd counts for something, but it's not much. And when you don't fully understand the product, you have no business selling it. Well, I learned the products that I had at LinkedIn and had just incredible people around me. There were probably 20 or 30 people who were just incredibly helpful at LinkedIn in helping me learn the ecosystem, the product, and how to tell a story in a credible, also a concise way. The learnings there and just that company and platform were amazing to me. I just can't say enough nice things about them. And I would say coming from Tesla, even though I wasn't in sales there, I was technically in supply chain, it did help as well with getting out of a military cultural mindset, because it's such a different culture, and into a business and sales mindset. And yeah, I would say, look, sales for me growing up was like people with used cars with like, that car has been through a flood and you don't know about it and they know about it. And it's like all this information disconnect. I think sales of sophisticated technology and software products and even some of the advertising products is much different. Like you're not selling snake oil, you're not selling, sleazy used cars, and it's quite technical. If you really are an expert on the product and understand what the offering is, I've told many a person, we are not a good fit for you. Sorry, but you shouldn't purchase this product. You shouldn't do this. And those who do, this is what this product might be able to do, but you don't make some promise you can't deliver. And I think those things have served me well. I think sales is incredibly important. No product sold itself ever. It's not the infantry of the business world, but it's not the infantry, because it is in many ways that tip of the spear that without it, you're not probably going to have much success.
Our next section is the SitRep, or the situation report. And the first thing I'd like to ask you just about what you're doing now. So about AdVon Commerce. How did that come to be? And for those that don't know.
Yeah, we're in a niche that most on this will probably have no idea about. And that's great. The highest level that is probably all that most need to know is we help businesses, particularly those that produce editorial content, grow commerce revenue streams. And that's the simple and important version to take away. I think to back up on why it came about, we built BestReviews, and along the way realized, wait, all of these publications are falling short when it comes to what they could do in commerce. And we partnered with some, we clearly sold to one, and learned a ton along the way, and realized, wait a minute, I can probably start something that leverages some of these lessons. And so I guess if we go back a little bit, I was saying how I learned how little I knew. Along the way of learning how little I knew, I learned that other people knew even less. And if I can share some of the 1 or 2% knowledge I have of the 100% about kind of editorial content meets e-commerce, then and other people are at 0.1% or even zero, there's actually a value prop there where I can build tools, products, software, services that can actually be a value add. And it's kind of cool too, the world of kind of digital content and journalism is under intense pressure and headwinds. And if you think of a lot of work, and Tim's in a similar boat, if you think of a lot of the work we've done, we have directly impacted quality independent journalism being able to continue to exist. And so I think for those of us that value, the republic or the democracy, depending on how you think about it, those are things that are important. I certainly don't think many would view some of the other countries as truly having an independent press, and we have a whole lot more people in PR than journalism today. But those that are in journalism, we need some of those to remain, I believe.
Ben, like a few years ago when we were chatting, you were kind of yet, I think, to start AdVon, but we're doing and still are, I think, doing some advisory work for various companies. I'm curious, like, what led you to hop back into the founder boat? You, I guess, touched on this a bit earlier, but versus staying an advisor and growing that sort of business, how did you find your way back into starting from the starting line?
I've just now probably actually fallen in love with the process. For those that don't know, and Tim does, the world of entrepreneurship is generally kind of getting up in the morning. I personally like to do exercise first every single day, no matter what, and then getting ready to get punched, and you just don't know where, right? Is it the face? Is it like right in the stomach? Is it coming at you in the shins? I don't know, but like you're going to get punched. As an aggressive entrepreneur, I would say almost every single day. And by that, I mean 7 days a week, not 5. I didn't truly love it. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it. I gained from it. But I think as I advised a bunch of companies, I realized I'd actually prefer to be the one getting punched rather than watching you get punched. And that's not to say that's right for most people. I actually advise nearly everyone to avoid entrepreneurship at all costs because it is an incredibly uncertain, painful, and just an incredibly challenging and unlikely way to succeed or spend time. However, if at some point in time you can fall in love with the process, and the process is generally speaking pain, I think that it may be a place worth spending a little bit of time. And I just, the advisory stuff is, I still do some. I'm very picky with the projects I take on, but I want to be in the fray.
There's that infantry coming through, I think. So I'd like to ask you next about the team at AdVon. So very few times do you really get to pick those you work with. I know we didn't in the military. LinkedIn, you didn't, maybe a bit at BestReviews, but very curious to hear like kind of how, as the founder, you went about building this team or thinking about this team, which I think you're still building, but kind of how you're approaching that.
What I saw at BestReviews is one hire where you're like, you know what, we're going to kind of make an exception. This person's like a little bit toxic, but they're like, credentialed, or their resume is really strong, or we think it'll increase enterprise value, or blah. Wrong. 100% wrong, 100% of the time. Cancer, as we can see from like humans, right? You don't need like cancer in 7,000 places to kill you. One place, and just give it time. It'll spread, it'll grow, it'll kill you. It'll just kill you. We learned these things, and I've made infinitely, different mistakes and more mistakes and the same mistakes again on a lot of places. But I think generally speaking, we've avoided cancer at AdVon. And even like with the early, signs of it, we were incredibly proactive to prevent that. And again, back to LinkedIn, they had a rule in the sales org: we will not hire cancerous people. And I'll give a lot of credit to a Chicagoan you might know who used to run the sales org, who had instituted that. So for those who get into those seats, and you get so fortunate, Lance, to your point, that you can pick the team you go to war with, or go into you go to market motion with, which might be more accurate. Pick the people that you want to be with, right? Pick the people you're going to learn from. You're going to teach them. They want to grow. They want to learn. If not, it's not worth it, even if the numbers are good, because a toxic, cancerous person can make you not want to come to the office. And that's, no matter how much money you're making, it's not going to be fulfilling in my limited experiences. And so, I think a ton about who we're selecting in, who I'm spending my time with. I think more about it probably every day than I did the day before. Hopefully, everyone gets a chance at some point to pick these people. And then I would say the challenge and the thing we have to be honest with yourself is the business you start, if you are so fortunate to start one, and if it succeeds at any level, not everyone's going to grow at the same pace or into the roles of the future. So I feel super fortunate. My co-founder is ironically one of Tim Shaw's young cadets when it was, I believe, Lieutenant Shaw leading, or Cadet Lieutenant Shaw leading a platoon at Buckner, who still lives, just to give Tim even more props because he'll never do it for himself. My co-founder still lives by a Tim Shawism, which was every night before you go to bed, drink a glass of water. Every morning before you start anything, exercise or whatever, you drink another glass of water. And this guy lives by it every day still. But the cool thing for me is I'd worked with my co-founder. We actually trained together for selection for Special Forces. We attended that at Bragg together. And so we'd actually known each other almost 15 years when we started this. Had we been like hanging out every day that whole time? No, but there's a bond formed for all of us that have been through these sorts of experiences, whether it be Ranger School or whatever, that's incredibly helpful. And then just aligning on kind of values and stuff. And, you could ask him, there were some, tests I put him through. And of course, he put me through tests as well to kind of understand, where are you going to break? What's going to break you? What's important? What do you value? Do you want to work 100 hours a week? Do you want to work all day Saturday? Do you do that when there's an emergency? Do you do it under no circumstances? What are these red lines? And I think we nailed a lot of those things, which once you have that co-founder cohesion, I think you're way more capable of growing a business, succeeding as a business, and also creating and growing a culture that you can actually feel great about.
No, that's amazing. I'll definitely drink my water before I go to bed tonight. Last question I have for you, Ben. Looking into the future with AdVon, very curious what you want to build, what this becomes, what you hope for the rest of the team in sort of this endeavor.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff we can't share for a bunch of reasons, which you get, but I can share a couple of things. We've been super fortunate to have been able to give back. And Tim knows a little bit about this, but I think for me, building an empire, creating a bunch of kind of money in bank accounts, like relatively meaningless. And so I think the thing I'm already most proud of that I know is just in its early innings is there's a culture of that in the company where in our case, a meaningful percentage of our revenues is given to a number of different philanthropic causes, some of which are very connected to veterans and all are connected to kind of relieving pain. So that's something I'm super proud of. I think this ability to grow people, we have people who've been with us from the beginning. We have people who have grown immensely professionally, personally, financially inside the business. Like those are things we can always strive for. And we talk about not having any glass ceilings and not putting people on governors. I think those are things that I want to remain. If I'm fortunate enough to be involved with the company a long time, I want them to remain though beyond. I want them to remain in people who leave the company and go other places and build and start other businesses, because there's nothing more frustrating to me. And it's probably one of my few kind of gripes with the Army and military is if I'm the most talented person, I should be promoted. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. In these small businesses, when you're starting them and building that DNA, you can actually do that. And I think it's unbelievable to allow people to truly be rewarded and be able to respond to those incentives in a way that encourages and guides performance and allows for, frankly, a little bit of fairness, a little bit of meritocracy, and a little bit of economic opportunity for people who wouldn't have it otherwise because they don't look the right way for the big company. They're not brought up in culture the right way. And so they're just screwed in a bunch of these settings. Changing that is something that I find phenomenally rewarding. And I don't think there's, we have several people on our team who just wouldn't have had the same success in almost any other environment.
Let's get into the next segment, the SOP, or Standard Operating Procedure. A common theme with this podcast is the adage of if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Who are some mentors or books or movies or even Harvard Business School West Point classes that have helped you along this journey?
all of them have helped in some way or another. And that might sound phony, but I think this stuff's so cumulative. If I started calling out specifics, it would take literally the rest of this podcast and several more days to list them all. But I'll highlight like just a couple of like points that I think were super meaningful. My boss in the Army that allowed me to take, basically 90 days of leave to do a banking internship at UBS. Like there's these little points in time, right? Moments in time where one small decision, I think, like reverberates for the rest of your life, if not beyond. Like if I hadn't done that internship and hadn't had the experience and credibility and that differentiator on my resume and application packet, given my GPA from West Point, I don't think I would have necessarily gotten into the business schools that I did. And if I hadn't gone to those business schools, like the whole trajectory changes. You don't co-found BestReviews. You don't have this impact. You're not able to give back. You're not able to help these veterans, blah, 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 blah. And so I think there's these like snippets in time where opportunities present themselves to people that work really hard. You just have to seize that moment. Was it fun to use my vacation days to do nothing but grind? No. But did it get me someplace I wanted to be? Yes. And I'm grateful for that boss. Ironically, I just saw him a week ago who took that chance and said, hey, this kid's working hard. He's going to transition. I'm going to help him along the way. So that those people that helped along the way and took a chance, the people at UBS, Chris Abbott actually is a PE guy now. He took a chance and got me a job. He's an Air Force veteran, not a West Point guy, but it's the one actual time so far in my career that a veteran's taken a chance on me in the private sector. And, I just couldn't be more grateful. So there's too many, but I would just say when people offer to help that legitimately can, take them up on it, thank them for it over and over. I can't tell you how many times I've thanked these different people who've been helpful, and it's still not enough. And I'll never make it right, but you can at least make sure you haven't been ungrateful. So for me, it's all of it. It's the professors at each stage. It's the bosses. There's too many to get specific on, but I would say that I'm super grateful for them all. And the one idea I would have is as you get into certain parts of the journey, if you're not reflecting on them in some form of journaling, you're probably leaving value on the table. And that I owe to my classmate from West Point's father, Scott Snook, who's a professor at HBS, who reminded me this is probably a good tactic because I wasn't doing it at business school. So I'm grateful for that particular thing. I think I got maybe 2x out of HBS what I would have gotten if I hadn't started that process and been reflecting every day for the vast majority of my time there.
It's apparent that nobody that's been on the podcast sits down all day and watches TV. How are you trained to get better at being a better leader, entrepreneur? What are some of your core habits that have helped make you successful?
So I think there's a long list there too. But if I were to break it down into like these really, really simple things, it's the kind of body, mind, spirit concept, right? So for me, the body thing we talked about earlier, it's like every day starts with wellness. That doesn't mean you're doing like a 100-mile marathon, but for me, every day will start with exercise. Every day will start with meditation. So to me, that's kind of body, mind, and some prayers. I think for those that have no religion, that could be irrelevant, but there's some form factor of some sort of spirituality that if you want to achieve your maximum potential, let's just say X is where you are today, you think 10X might be possible. I don't think you'll find anyone who doesn't have some sort of body, mind, spirit integration, practice, etc. And it's probably daily. And I think we can go back quite a ways in history and find that trend line repeats itself, generally speaking, over and over again. And that religion might be, or spirituality might be something that's very unconventional. It might be that this is a meditation practice, but there's something there. I think at least in like 99 cases out of 100. So for me, it's morning exercise. It's a meditation. It's generally speaking, healthy eating, drinking a lot of water to try to follow Tim Shaw's example. Probably not enough, but I get at least my like 10, 15 glasses. It's healthy eating. It's trying to get sleep. It's taking vitamins. I think you have to bring all that stuff to the table. Then being discreet about what you don't do. Just being completely frank, I don't own a TV. I don't own a microwave. I don't watch TV. I don't follow sports, generally speaking. I follow the markets. I follow business. I read business books. And I work, generally speaking, endlessly until I stop to read different things that are, probably somehow connected to work in some way or another, and then try to get sleep and go do it again and again and just relentlessly push forward. It's not for everyone, but I think that if you want to try to get, from X to 10X, it's probably to your point. It's not watching a lot of TV. And it's not just like endlessly hanging out. It's probably called getting really, really focused and then being absolutely relentless about moving towards, whatever those goals are.
And as we near the end of the podcast, the last segment is called Giving Back. Let's just end on this question, essentially, which is core to the On Point podcast. Curious if you have any advice for younger veterans, those getting out of the military, or those interested in starting their own business someday. What advice you might have for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's the simplest advice you'll probably ever hear, but I think it's still super valuable, and you'd be surprised how far it'll get you. They had this thing when I did selection for special forces that was kind of a tweak on an Army concept. It was never be late, never be light, and always look cool. The tweak, I think, is probably built off of that concept of right place, right time, right uniform that I think some of us might have heard at West Point in the Army. It seems really, really basic at first. And then when you really start digging in, you realize those are the fundamentals that drive everything. And they're actually all that matter. And so at the end of the day, it takes a different form factor, right? In the business world, you're not in a uniform. But I will tell you, if you consistently show up at the right places and you consistently show up early and you're consistently hyper prepared, you will probably succeed in whatever you put your mind to in the private sector and with your transition and everything else. When you show up a little bit late, a little bit, the concept of being light is a reference to a rucksack being light, right? You show up a little bit unprepared. You didn't bring all your gear. Like, you got a big meeting with someone to help with your transition or an interview. You didn't really read about the company in advance or seek out through your network people to prepare. You're light, right? You're not prepared. So, have you really, do you really deserve it? Have you earned it? Probably not. And I think if you do those three though, and you're showing up early, you're showing up fully prepared, you're in the right mindset, there's a lot that's possible, particularly in a pretty employee-friendly market. Those three traits are vital, and they take different form factors. It eventually becomes, maybe you do want to be an entrepreneur, to your point earlier, Lance. Well, guess what? The first person in the company is probably you as the founder or co-founder. So these are the things that are going to allow you to succeed. You're going to have to be able to battle through a lot of non-structured environments. If you don't show up prepared and ready to grind, I don't know many entrepreneurs who've had a lot of success who can't nail those three over and over and over again.
Man, Ben, wish we had a lot more time. Unfortunately, we don't. But this has been fantastic. Before we let you go, one, any last advice or thoughts for the audience? And two, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
For you and Lance, just couldn't be more grateful and big fans of everything you've done. For those of you that don't know, my first memories of Tim are looking across the battalion at West Point at this guy that just had a reputation, and then seeing him next in the business world when he was at Stanford. It was phenomenally exciting to know that some of these people who I never thought I would probably be anywhere near, I could actually hang out with and learn something from. Staying close with him the last really 10 plus years is something I just couldn't be more grateful for. It's kind of proof to me that the power of the long gray line is very different than I think many other experiences, institutions, et cetera. And it's something that you can't put a price tag on. And I think the same is said for Lance. We haven't had as much time together yet, but just super grateful for what you're doing for this work and for the other work that you do. Look, I'm happy to be helpful to people that have a very, very specific interest or passion in something right around, the e-commerce meets media intersection. We are hiring and we're very veteran friendly. We have, I think, actually maybe more West Points percentage wise than almost any other company in kind of the tech startup world that I'm aware of, at least. And we hope to keep it that way to the extent we can. But LinkedIn's probably the preferred platform. I'm there, and it's pretty user-friendly platform for those that are not already intimately familiar with it. And a minimalist shareholder now too. It's not. I certainly don't own the company. Yeah, the only thing I think would be parting advice would. I think I would say to really anyone, if you really want to do entrepreneurship, so be it. It's going to most likely be incredibly hard. But if you don't want to do it, I do think at least, having been around Silicon Valley world part of the time, and Tim as well, you can get drug into like, that's the only cool thing to do. And if you're not an entrepreneur, you're not cool and not this or not that. Do what's right for you. I think for a lot of people, the corporate path is an incredible path. For a lot of people, staying in the military can be an incredible path. And so I generally steer a lot of people who are wanting to hear one thing. I kind of tell them something they don't want to hear, which is the Army is incredible for like real healthcare that's fully funded, and for job security and things that they're just completely absent when you leave. I would also say that the world of like being able to spend time with your family and that sort of thing, like, don't underestimate how good the Army is, or big corporations, right? Like, there's something special to be said if you've got a wife or any sort of spouse or partner, whatever they are, you've got this significant person in your life or kids or family that you really care about. Entrepreneurship is the last place you should go if those things matter a lot to you, for most people, because it's going to be incredibly difficult. There is no such thing, I think, as entrepreneurial work-life balance. You try to integrate them, and I think, as most entrepreneurs know, and Tim knows quite well because he's nodding, you will fail over and over and over again to properly integrate them. Don't like to discourage people, but I do like to be realistic, because it's not helpful to get into something and not go in eyes wide open. For those that choose that lonely, incredibly painful road, welcome to the grind.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for listening to On Point. Please take a moment to rate and review the show wherever you're listening. It really helps us out. We'll see you in the next episode.